I'm Nathan, a 24-year-old man, and my path to independence was anything but easy. For as long as I can remember, my parents, Margaret and Thomas, believed a good son followed their rules without question. My life felt like a constant tug of war, caught between their need to control every aspect of my existence and my growing desire for freedom. In their household, everything operated under strict roles. Margaret, my mother, was the gatekeeper of approval, while Thomas, my father, was the enforcer. They decided who my friends could be, what hobbies I pursued, and even how I spent my weekends. Their control wasn't overtly abusive, but it was suffocating. To them, my independence was a rebellion, a signal I didn't respect them. For years, I played along, quietly planning my escape. Hen I graduated high school. They were thrilled I'd gotten into a local college. Staying at home, under their roof, was their plan to save me money and ensure I focused on my studies. I lasted 1 year. By the time I turned 19, I'd had enough. I took a part-time job at a local coffee shop, scraped together a deposit for an apartment, and found a roommate. It was a bold move, and it didn't go over well. Day I moved out, they called it a betrayal. They accused me of wasting money, of making irresponsible choices, of turning my back on the family. To me, it was liberation. It wasn't easy juggling school, 2 part-time jobs, and late-night study sessions, but the sense of freedom was worth every exhausted morning. I finally graduated with a degree in business administration. I landed a full-time job in finance. It wasn't flashy, but it paid well enough to quit the side gigs and focus on building a life on my terms. But my parents weren't impressed. They thought I still owed them my choices, where to work, what to spend my money on, even how to spend my weekends. The first major clash came when I bought a modest car without consulting them. It's some luxury vehicle, just a reliable sedan I could afford. But when I told them, their reaction made it seem like I'd declared war. "You should have talked to us first," Margaret said, her tone sharp. Thomas called me ungrateful and too headstrong for my own good. I stood my ground. Later, I'd saved enough to buy a small 2-bedroom house. It was in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, but it was mine. This time, I didn't tell them until the deal was finalized. I thought they might finally see my efforts and be proud. Instead, I got an angry phone call. Margaret accused me of shutting them out. Thomas declared I was acting like I didn't need family at all. Their all.ns hurt, but I told myself I was prepared for it. What I didn't expect was how far they'd go. A few days later, they cut me off, completely. They canceled the family phone plan I was still on and removed me from their health insurance. They stopped inviting me to gatherings and, according to mutual friends, started painting me as selfish and arrogant. Their pride, it seemed, couldn't handle my success. It is success. Months, I wrestled with their silence. But in the quiet, I found my footing. I poured my energy into work, earned a promotion, and treated myself to a new car. I spent weekends gardening, hosting game nights with friends, and making the little house feel like home. For the first time in years, I was happy. But my fappy didn't see it that way. They followed me on social media, liking posts they once ignored, leaving signored and comments. Margaret told an aunt my pictures were flaunting my independence. My younger sister Emily, still living at home, joined in, calling me too proud in our group chats. I didn't engage. If they wanted to talk, they knew how to reach me. I wouldn't grovel or beg. Months later, eared through a friend that Thomas had lost his job. Margaret's small bakery business was floundering. Emily had dropped out of college and moved back home. Suddenly, the family that once shunned me for being too independent was struggling to keep their heads above water. They didn't ask me for help directly, but subtle signs, liking old posts, leaving heart emojis, started appearing. I knew I could stay distant, letting them manage their consequences, or I could step in, but this time on my terms. Hearing about terms.nts's struggles from a friend didn't bring me any satisfaction. If anything, it left me conflicted. For all their flaws and the hurt they caused, they were still my family. But I couldn't just jump back into their lives without boundaries. That part of my life, the one where they dictated my every move, was long gone. The details of tuition trickled in slowly. My dad, Thomas, had been laid off, and my mom's bakery business was downsizing quickly. Bills were piling up, their power was close to being shut off, and groceries were coming from the local church pantry. Emily, my younger sister, who had once echoed their accusations, was now stuck in the middle of it all after dropping out of college. It sounded bleak, and as much as I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. But I wasn't couldn't. Them dragged me back into that toxic dynamic. If I helped, it had to be on my terms. No guilt trips, no lectures, no control, just support when it was needed. So I started small, quietly. I sent them grocerquietly.ift cards anonymously, making sure they couldn't trace them back to me. A week later, a neighbor mentioned overhearing Margaret talk about how a kind church group had stepped in to help. I had to laugh at the irony. She had no idea it was me. Emboldened by how well that went, I took it a step further. I called their utility company and paid off their overdue bills, ensuring their power stayed on. Again, I stayed anonymous. Days later, I saw Anonymous on Facebook thanking divine intervention for helping them through tough times. I rolled my eyes, but at least they had power and food. For now, that was enough. Emily, however, wasn't enough. I use. One evening, she called me out of the blue. It wasn't an emotional reunion, more like a cautious check-in. She kept it light, asking about work, mentioning her job hunt, and how things had been tough at home. She didn't apologize or even acknowledge the fallout directly, but the call felt like a test, seeing if the bridge between us could be rebuilt. I kept it casual, letting her lead the conversation. After that call, conversation.anonymous help wasn't sustainable. I couldn't keep patching up their financial messes without addressing the deeper issues. It was like putting a bandage on a broken leg. If I wanted to make a real difference, not just for them, but for myself, I'd have to step out of the shadows. But before making any big shadows, decided to set some boundaries. If they wanted my help, they'd have to meet me halfway. That meant no more pretending like the past hadn't happened. No sweeping things under the rug. I wasn't expecting groveling apologies or dramatic confessions, just a simple acknowledgement of how they'd treated me and a willingness to work together moving forward. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Forward Dias were stubborn, proud people, but if they truly wanted my support, they'd have to accept that I wasn't the rebellious teenager they once tried to control. I was done being the scapegoat in their narrative. The first step was figuring narrative. Reach out without reopening old wounds or letting them pull me into their chaos again. This wasn't about throwing money at their problems or proving a point. It was about seeing if they were willing to change, even just a little. It felt risky, but I knew it was time to stop hiding behind anonymous gift cards and utility payments. I was ready to face them. On my payments, weeks of quiet assistance, I decided it was time to stop hiding behind anonymity. If I wanted to help them build something sustainable and redefine our relationship, it couldn't be one-sided anymore. But I wasn't going to let them waltz back into my life like nothing had happened. They needed to know I was in control now, not them. I started small, reaching out to margthem.ith, a casual text. Hey Mom, heard through a friend things have been tough lately. How are friend elding up? It wasn't an emotional outpouring or a demand for answers, just a simple olive branch. To my surprise, she replied quickly. Branch. The tone warm and conversational. She told me about their struggles, but didn't acknowledge the fallout between us. It was as if she wanted to pretend none of it had ever happened. I let her talk, subtly weaving in what I already knew about their financial situation. She didn't deny it, but she downplayed the severity, focusing instead on how they were managing and how God had been providing. Her pride was still intact, barely. Providing. It in every word. That's when I decided to lay down my terms. Willing to help, I texted, keeping my tone calm but firm. But only if we can talk about what happened and work through it. I'm not asking for anything dramatic, just acknowledgement that things weren't fair between us. If we can meet halfway, I'm here. Her response was silence. Hours passed with here. Why? And I started to wonder if I'd miscalculated. Then, late that evening, a message came through. I'll need to talk to your father, she wrote. It was classic Margaret, caught between wanting to mend the relationship and not wanting to cross Thomas. The next day, Emily called me again. This Tim Thomas. One was different. She wasn't just testing the waters anymore. She apologized. She admitted she'd taken sides during the fallout because it was easier than challenging our parents. She told me she regretted how she'd treated me, and even thanked me for the anonymous help, which she'd figured out was from me. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first real step toward rebuilding trust with anyone in my family. But Thomas was a different story. When Margaret's family responded, it was clear he was putting up a fight. She thanked me for offering to help, but said they didn't think it was fair to attach conditions to family support. "Family shouldn't keep score," she wrote. "Love should be unconditional." I wasn't surprised. Thomas had always been unconditional. Tiali when it came to admitting he was wrong. But I wasn't going to let guilt or manipulation sway me. I replied calmly but firmly. "This isn't about keeping score. It's about respect. I've worked hard to build my life, and I won't let anyone undermine that, even family. If you can't meet me halfway, I can't help." Her reply was hesitant. A few carefully chosen words help, needing time to think. I knew what that really meant. Thomas wasn't ready to swallow his pride, and honestly, I didn't expect him to. Not yet. In the meantime, Emily and I continued to rebuild our reconnect. She started reaching out more, sharing updates about her job search and even asking for advice. She admitted feeling trapped, stuck in a cycle of dependency that felt impossible to break. I saw an opportunity to help, not by enabling her, but by giving her the tools to take control of her life. I offered to cover her first semester's tuition if she walife.ng to work part-time to contribute. It wasn't a handout, it was a partnership. She hesitated at first, unsure if she could juggle work and school, but after a few long conversations, she agreed. It was the first real step she'd taken toward independence, and I couldn't have been prouder. Predictably, Thomas and Margaret pushed back. "She's too prouder for this," Margaret argued. "She needs to focus on school, not stress about work." But I held my ground. "Independence is non-negotiable," I said. "This isn't about making her life harder. It's about helping her build something better." Emily took the leap, and seeing her grow gave me hope. For better. The time and years I felt like someone in my family was truly listening, but things with my parents remained tense. Margaret started listening. Mall signs of change, texting me updates about how they were managing their bills and even asking for budgeting advice. Thomas, however, stayed silent, his resentment simmering just below the surface. I could feel it in the way Margaret avoided mentioning him in our conversations, in the long pauses before her replies. Still, I stayed firm. I wasn't going to budge on my boundaries. Replies daughter how much tension it created. If they wanted my help, they'd have to earn it. Over the next few weeks, the cracks in my parents' resistance began to show. Margaret started texting me more often, cautiously at first, then with a little more warmth. She'd share small updates about their situation, like how they'd managed to sell off some unused furniture or cut back on unnecessary expenses. It was clear she was trying to show me they were making an effort, even if Thomas wasn't ready to admit it. Emily, on the other hand, was thriving in her new routine. She'd enrolled in community college and started working part-time at a local cafe. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She'd text me updates about her classes, excitedly sharing when she aced a test or nailed a project. For the first time, she seemed to believe in herself, and I couldn't have been prouder. Thomas, though, was still the same. He barely spoke to me, and wept louder. It was through Margaret. I didn't take it personally, well, not anymore. His pride was his fortress, and he wasn't about to let anyone, especially me, breach it. Even so, I noticed subtle shifts. Margaret mentioned he'd started fixing things around the house instead of letting them break. He was even looking into part-time work, something he'd resisted for months. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. As Emily gained confidence, she started opening up more about the something.ics at home. "They always made me feel like I couldn't do anything on my own," she admitted one night during a call, "like I was helpless without them." Her words hit me harder than I expected, because they mirrored exactly how I'd felt growing up. But hearing her say it made me realize how far we'd both come, and how much further we still had to go. Encouraged by her progress, I decided to host a small family dinner at my HGO. It had been years since we'd all sat down together, and I figured it might help ease some of the lingering tension. Emily was excited, offering to bring dessert from her cafe. Margaret sounded hesitant but agreed, warning me not to expect too much from Thomas. When the day arrived, I spent the morning cooking and setting the table. Thomas .ot to overthink it. Emily showed up early, helping me plate the food and chatting about her classes. Margaret and Thomas arrived shortly after, with Margaret carrying a casserole dish and Thomas trailing behind, looking uncomfortable. The dinner started off awkward as I'd expected. Thomas mostly stayed uncomfortable at his food, while Margaret filled the silence with small talk. Emily, bless her, did her best to keep the mood light, sharing funny stories from work and school. Slowly the tension eased, and by the time we got to dessert, the atmosphere felt almost normal. But just as I started to relax, Thomas spoke up. "It's good you're almost normal," said, his tone measured but pointed. "But don't push her too hard. Not everyone's as headstrong as you." The room went silent. Emily shot me a nervous glance, but I didn't bite. Instead, I calmly replied, "I'm not pushing her. She's proving to herself what she's capable of, and I couldn't be prouder." He didn't respond, just went back to his plate, but I noticed Margaret squeeze prouder. Under the table. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. After dinner, Margaret pulled me aside while Emily and Thomas cleaned up. "Than progress. Hosting," she said quietly. "I know things aren't perfect, but it means a lot that you're willing to try." Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the mother I'd once looked up to. That night, as they left, Thomas gave me a stiff nod. It wasn't an apology or an acknowledgement meant of anything, but it was the closest thing to approval I'd gotten from him in years. I wasn't expecting miracles, but it felt like a step forward. In the weeks that followed, the dynamics began to shift even more. Emily continued to forward balancing school and work with a determination that amazed me. She even started talking about transferring to a 4-year university, something she'd once dismissed as impossible. Watching her growth reminded me why I'd stepped back into their lives in the first place. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about giving us all a chance to rebuild, one step at a time. Margaret, too, began to show more signs of change. She asked me for advice on budgeting aita and started tracking expenses, something she'd once scoffed at. She sold off more items they didn't need and downsized parts of her bakery business to cut costs. It wasn't enough to completely stabilize their finances, but it was progress. Thomas remained the wild card. He was polite enough to avoid outright conflict, but the progress lingered just below the surface. I'd catch glimpses of it in his comments, or the way he'd leave the room when Margaret mentioned something I'd done to help. Still, there were moments, small, fleeting ones, where I thought he might be softening. Margaret told me he'd grudgingly admitted the structured help I offered was better than the enabling handouts they'd expected. He didn't use the word respect, but the sentiment was there. For the first time in years, it felt like we were moving forward. Not perfectly, not without bumps, but forward. And for now, that was enough story too. As the eldest child of a middle-class family that has always taken pleasure in being conventional and close-knit, I am a 27-year-old lady. We've always lived in a modest but totally paid-off home in a quiet neighborhood, and my parents own a tiny business, a quaint bakery, that they have operated for more than 20 years. Although I was aware of our lack of wealth as a child, my parents instilled in me the value of diligence and familial devotion. Until recently, I thought I could rely on my family, regardless. However, it appears that loyalty has its boundaries. My grandfather gave me a trust money when he passed away around 5 years ago. Although it's hardly lottery money, it's enough to make a big difference in someone's life if handled properly. The hitch is that unless it's for particular reasons, like purchasing my first house or going back to school, I won't be able to access it until I age 30. I quote, "We've been waiting patiently to utilize money to either start my own business or buy a little flat in the city. Since I've always been a sensible person, I've been looking forward to it as a safety net and a chance to start something of my own." My 25-year-old brother Tyler recently became engaged to Lauren, a 26-year-old woman from a more affluent family. Although Lauren's charisma and confidence light up a room, I found that she has a way of pushing boundaries that either makes people admire her or avoid her. Until recently, I was cautiously hopeful that she might become a member of the family. A few months back, it began during a family meal. Lauren brought up my inheritance in her typical sophisticated and vivacious manner. It wasn't nuanced. She asked me what I intended to do with it and said I was fortunate to have something so important waiting for me. I described my thoughts on establishing a company or living in a small flat. To be honest, it seemed weird to discuss my finances so publicly, so I kept it vague. Lauren grinned and remarked, almost in jest, that it would be really beneficial if I utilized the funds to help her and Tyler with their future plans, or to support their impending wedding. Lauren merely looked at me awkwardly, as like she was expecting for me to agree, but Tyler laughed it off. I didn't. My parents immediately intervened, claiming that it was my choice and my money. Lauren, however, persisted in her argument that family funds had to be used for the sake of the entire family. At the time, I dismissed it, but there was something wrong about her tone. Lauren, S remarks got more straightforward throughout the course of the following few weeks. At family get-togethers, she began to take me aside and urge me to reevaluate my plans for the trust fund. Helping her and Tyler purchase their ideal home would be a far better use of money, she said. She even presented it as an opportunity for me to make an investment in the future of the family. She didn't seem to get the idea when I initially gently told her no, explaining that I had other intentions and that the trust had certain requirements. To his credit, Tyler apologized on her behalf a few times before he began to say things like, "I understand your perspective," or "You're in a great position to assist." Although there wasn't direct pressure, I felt uneasy nonetheless. However, I was genuinely taken aback by my folks' response when I brought it up. They were reluctant rather than shutting it down completely. My mother even mentioned that Tyler had always had greater financial difficulties and that Lauren simply wanted to feel like she belonged to the family. It dawned on me then. This was not going away without a fight. When Lauren confronted me over a laid-back weekend lunch with just the two of us, it was the last straw. She explicitly requested that I think about giving them a share of the inheritance as a wedding gift. This time, I firmly answered no. She said I was self-centered. She said that I was hoarding funds that may significantly impact Tyler's future. I was so taken aback that I wasn't even sure how to react. Later, Tyler apologized over the phone, but it seemed more like damage control than sincere regret. Lauren had a point, he said, but she didn't mean to come across as overly forceful. I have a nagging suspicion that this is only the beginning. My equilibrium has been upset by my parents' unexpected empathy with Lauren's viewpoint. I am not sure if they truly agree with her, or if they're just attempting to maintain harmony. In any case, I feel as though I'm being framed as the bad guy in my own family. Little things also began to catch my attention. Relatives have commented on how fortunate I am. Subtle changes in Tyler and Lauren's demeanor in my presence. They seem to be pushing themselves to the limit. I feel like I need to be ready for a battle that I didn't ask for, even though I'm trying to maintain my composure and respect my limits. To be honest, I don't know how much longer I can ignore it. Update 1. Tyler texted me to invite me to lunch a few weeks after the awkward chats with Lauren. It seemed harmless enough. Siblings catching up informally. I thought it could be a good time to make things clear. Lauren and Tyler were waiting when I got there. Everyone is grinning, normal small chat about work, updates on their wedding preparations, and a few jokes about how hectic everything was kicked off the meal. The mood didn't change until dessert was served. Lauren leaned closer and spoke in a beautiful, almost practiced voice. Raised my trust money once more. She didn't skirt the problem this time. She recommended that I give them a portion of the money as a wedding gift. Really, that wasn't a proposal. It was more akin to an anticipation. She also mentioned the significance it would have for the family and how it would demonstrate my support for Tyler's future. Remaining composed, I reiterated that the trust had conditions and that I had other intentions for the funds. Lauren wasn't going to back down, but I believed that would be sufficient. She went on to say that I didn't really need the money at the moment and that I was hoarding wealth that might benefit everyone. Tyler said that while he saw my point of view, Lauren had a valid argument. He presented it as though I was being irrational for not even thinking about it. I felt as though I had entered a setup, and the remainder of lunch was unpleasant. My parents invited me over for what they termed a family gathering a few days later. My folks were dining with Tyler and Lauren when I arrived. I immediately had the same depressing sensation I experienced after lunch. I was taken aback when my parents, who had previously always respected my boundaries, suggested that I divide the bequest to save needless strife. My father even added that family comes first, and that this may be my way of offering assistance. I was blown away. Although they weren't explicitly asking for it, there was no denying the pressure. Lauren appeared arrogant, as though she had already triumphed. I informed them that I owned the trust fund, and that I had specific intentions for it. However, my parents began making excuses for Tyler and Lauren rather than supporting me. Lauren simply wanted to feel like a member of the family, my mom said, and Tyler had always had it harder financially. It hurt more than I thought the betrayal would. Although I didn't commit to anything as I left the meeting, I knew it wasn't over yet. The days that followed were hectic. Lauren was able to include her extended family in the chaos somehow. I began receiving messages from aunts, uncles, and even distant relatives urging me to support Tyler and Lauren because it was the proper thing to do. It became evident that Lauren had painted me as avaricious and unwilling to provide for her own family. The fact that the money had been given to me for certain reasons and that it wasn't even yet available didn't matter. The story was set. My dearest friend was equally as indignant as I was when I confided in her, even though she told me I wasn't at fault. The incessant calls and texts from family members didn't go away. I have a very close relative who defended me and even offered to mediate the situation. Lauren swiftly put an end to it, accusing the cousin of putting her nose in inappropriate places. When Tyler contacted me late one night and sounded more frantic than I had ever heard him, things took a turn for the worst. By claiming that the money would make Lauren feel accepted into the family and that it was my opportunity to show him how much I cared, he attempted to guilt-trip me. I declined once again, but I was exhausted from the discussion. I made the decision to speak with a lawyer at that point. I had to be absolutely certain that I was the only person with legal authority to tap the trust fund. The attorney reassured me that I was safe and suggested that I keep a record of everything in case things worsened. However, that feeling of relaxation was fleeting. My parents began to insinuate that if I didn't make concessions, they may emotionally withdraw themselves. Although it wasn't a direct threat, it was obvious what it implied. They presented it as me prioritizing money before family, but they failed to acknowledge that Lauren was the one who started the argument in the first place. Every action I made seemed to exacerbate the situation, since I was cornered. Lauren persisted in telling her story to everybody who would listen, portraying Tyler and herself as the victims of my alleged greed. I had the unshakable sensation that things were going to grow worse since the whole thing was getting out of hand. Update 2. Shortly after the family gathering, I learned of something that really shocked me. Lauren had already begun making deposits for an expensive wedding, according to a casual comment made by a mutual acquaintance. She had reserved a posh location, negotiated a costly caterer, and even scheduled a fitting for a designer gown. I found it impressive that she was spending with such assurance, as though she already possessed the money. Then something clicked. Lauren was hoping that I would cave. A few days later, I addressed her in her typical calm manner during a family get-together. Lauren acknowledged that she needed to make snap judgments in order to secure the finest vendors, and that she had thought I would change her mind soon. She even presented it as if she were helping me by making sure it was the year's biggest family gathering. Tyler stepped in to defend her when I pointed out how conceited that was. He explained she didn't mean to go too far and had been under pressure to plan. However, it didn't seem like going too far. It seemed premeditated. When my parents revealed an information I was unaware of, things took a different direction. Over the years, they have been lending Tyler money. They said that because he was beginning a family with Lauren, they felt compelled to help him. Their reluctance to confront him or Lauren was understandable, but it also made me realize how pervasive the favoritism was. My inheritance was no longer the only issue here. There was a pattern. Lauren's next course of action was to go public, at least indirectly. She began sharing ambiguous updates about family, greed, and self-centered relatives on social media. Soon after, I started receiving a ton of messages from distant relatives, many of whom I hadn't spoken to in years. They advised me to assist Tyler and Lauren since it was the appropriate thing to do. I was even labeled ruthless by others. I was destroying the family over money while cleaning. I circled back to my lawyer at this point. She suggested that I remove myself from the problem on both a legal and emotional level. That required keeping track of everything and avoiding family arguments about money. I knew I had to defend myself, even if it seemed like a dramatic move. My best buddy, who is always my sane voice, advised me to go farther. No communication with Lauren and Tyler for some time. I could see her point of view, but I wasn't sure I was prepared for it. Tyler left me a voicemail about this time. His voice broke as he begged me to change my mind, claiming that the family was being destroyed by this whole affair. It was difficult to overlook the underlying guilt trip, even if he presented it as a misunderstanding. Shortly after, my parents agreed with him and accused me of being unyielding and uncompromising. With the exception of a few important individuals who saw through the sham, it seemed like everyone was pulling against me. Then came the most disturbing revelation to yet. My relative informed me that Lauren had been attempting to pry into my financial affairs. Under the pretense of assisting with the family budget, she apparently had been requesting information from Tyler regarding the trust and even attempted to gain access to my bank records. Fortunately, there was no real way for them to enter. But I got shivers just thinking about her going that far. My cousin, who had been surreptitiously monitoring the event, discovered something even more startling. Lauren has a track record of using deception to get money. She had previously been engaged, but that engagement ended badly when her ex-boyfriend found out she had been exploiting him to pay for her lavish lifestyle. With this knowledge in hand, my cousin went up to her, which just made things more dramatic. Accusing my cousin of attempting to turn the family against her, Lauren denied everything. The extended family, meanwhile, began to split into two distinct groups. Some people accepted Lauren's story about me being avaricious and self-centered. Others started to see the wider picture after hearing my side of the tale. With family get-togethers becoming battlefields of hushed confrontations and passive-aggressive remarks, the division further exacerbated the mayhem. I realized I couldn't continue living this way. I began to really contemplate dramatic steps to secure my inheritance, and more significantly, my mental health, since the stress was getting to me. If Lauren persisted in her harassing, my attorney advised sending a stop and desist letter. Sometimes the only way to maintain peace is to cut people off, as my best buddy reminded me. I didn't make the choice lightly, but I could see the signs were there. By now, it seemed impossible to turn back after the battle lines were established. The one guy who was coordinating it all didn't appear to have any plans to stop, and my previously close-knit family was now divided. All I could do was pray for some sort of resolution in whatever happened next. Update 3. My lawyer and I agreed it was time to act after weeks of non-stop turmoil. She wrote Lauren an official cease and desist letter, warning her to halt the defamation and harassment efforts. It seemed like the right thing to do, especially since Lauren's actions were getting worse. Her social media writings had grown even more scathing, with nebulous references to treachery and barely disguised charges of egotistical family members ruining relationships. I knew that ignoring it would just give her more confidence, and it was tough to cope with. It seems that the cease and desist struck a chord. Tyler and Lauren threatened to sue me for mental distress in retaliation within days. They claimed they were suffering undue hardship as a result of my reluctance to share the bequest and a court letter. At best, their threats were weak. My attorney reassured me that they lacked a legitimate case. Even yet, the chutzpah was astounding. Previously, my laid-back younger brother Tyler was suddenly deeply involved in Lauren's plots. Naturally, my parents were involved once more. They pleaded with me to resolve this amicably so as not to further shame the family. Right and wrong were not their main concerns. It was about what other people would think of this continuing dispute. They said I ought to make a concession. Let everything go and give Lauren and Tyler what they wanted. It was obvious where their allegiance lay when they refused to admit the hurt Lauren was creating. It wasn't with me either. Lauren intensified her social media shenanigans in the meantime. She began spreading inflated tales about poisonous family members attempting to spoil her and Tyler's nuptials. Reading between the lines wasn't difficult, and members of our extended family who weren't previously connected began contacting me to inquire about if the messages were about me. It was too much to handle the incessant stream of inquiries and remarks. I then made the decision to completely stop communicating with Lauren and Tyler and block them on all platforms. My cousin, who had supported me through everything, took a major step forward. In the event that things worsened, she volunteered to assist me in obtaining proof for my defense. We looked through screenshots of Lauren's messages, posts, and even brief exchanges from family get-togethers together. Building a case demonstrating Lauren's deceptive practices wasn't difficult. The more we learned, the more I understood how far she would go to achieve her goals. When I learned that Lauren had been spreading rumors at my place of employment, things took a more sinister turn. Someone had been calling around asking intrusive questions about me and my financial situation, a coworker said when she pulled me aside. Making the connection to Lauren didn't take long. Fortunately, my helpful coworker assisted me in gathering resources to deal with possible defamation. It was frustrating, but regrettably not surprising, to think that she was attempting to ruin my career. In the midst of all of this, Tyler made a crucial error by inadvertently sharing screenshots of a private conversation with Lauren in a group text with my parents. Her true intentions were made abundantly evident by the messages, one of which openly declared that she wanted to get the bag and that my parents would persuade me to give in. She even made a joke about how she had always been skilled at persuading others to agree with her. The messages were damning. I sent my parents the text right away, in the hopes that they would finally realize the truth. They reacted with a mixture of denial and shock. They were hesitant to face Lauren head-on, even though they couldn't deny the evidence. As if to justify her actions, my dad muttered something about how weddings bring out the worst in people. My mom seemed more conflicted, but she still didn't fully side with me. The extended family, however, had a much stronger reaction once the text circulated. Many of them began to rally behind me. Those who had previously been on the fence or believed Lauren's version of events quickly changed their tune. The shift was noticeable, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this battle. Lauren predictably tried to backpedal. She issued what could only be described as a fake apology, filled with vague statements about misunderstandings and getting caught up in the stress of wedding planning. It was clear she wasn't sorry for what she'd done, only for getting caught. I refused to accept her apology, which only seemed to fuel her anger. With my lawyer's advice, I decided to take the final step, filing a restraining order against Lauren. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but her harassment had crossed too many lines. The restraining order not only protected me legally, but also sent a clear message that I wouldn't tolerate her behavior any longer. The fallout from the restraining order was immediate. Lauren's social media posts abruptly stopped, and Tyler seemed to pull back as well. The tension with my parents remained, but the silence from Lauren was a relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had some breathing room to start focusing on myself again. Update 4. Even after the restraining order, Lauren refused to back down. Through mutual friends and family grapevines, I kept hearing snippets of her complaints. She claimed that I was ruining her life and tearing the family apart with my stubbornness. Her insistence on framing herself as the victim was exhausting. Every time I thought the situation might calm down, someone would forward me a screenshot of another outburst or passive-aggressive comment she made in a group chat. The breaking point came when Tyler called me directly for the first time in weeks. He issued an ultimatum: either I agree to share the inheritance or he would cut me out of his life. He framed it as a choice between being part of the family or continuing to cause unnecessary drama. It was clear he was under pressure from Lauren, but hearing those words from my brother was still a gut punch. I confronted my parents about the entire situation, laying everything out from Lauren's manipulations to Tyler's ultimatum. For the first time, I directly accused them of enabling Tyler and Lauren's entitlement. Instead of addressing the core issue, they dropped a bombshell of their own. They admitted they'd been struggling financially for a while. The bakery wasn't doing as well as it used to, and they were worried about retirement. They hinted that Tyler and Lauren had been helping them out here and there, which explained why they were so reluctant to stand up to them. It wasn't just favoritism. They were financially dependent on them. Hearing this shifted my perspective on why my parents had been so passive, but it didn't make their behavior any less hurtful. My cousin, who had been my strongest supporter throughout this ordeal, suggested it was time to go. No contact with my immediate family, at least temporarily. She reminded me that I couldn't keep setting myself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they weren't willing to meet me halfway. After a lot of thought, I decided to step back entirely from family events. It wasn't an easy decision, but the constant tension was affecting every aspect of my life. I told my parents that I wouldn't be attending any events for the foreseeable future, and requested them not to contact me unless they were ready to handle the problem seriously. Their reaction was inevitably dramatic, accusing me of abandoning the family, but I stayed steady. Meanwhile, Lauren's social media assaults developed into open defamation. She started posting extensive and utterly manufactured stories about how I had destroyed her wedding plans and refused to help out of sheer spite. A few common acquaintances who weren't aware of the complete issue began to distance themselves from me believing her version of events. My lawyer stepped in again, delivering her a warning regarding defamation. The letter must have rattled her since the posts ceased abruptly after that. Interestingly, I started to perceive fractures in Tyler and Lauren's unified front. Mutual acquaintances intimated that Tyler was beginning to regret how far things had gone, but felt stuck by Lauren's expectations. Around the same time, I learned through the same grapevine that Lauren had a backup plan. She was supposedly preparing to leave Tyler once they were financially established. The story originated from someone who had overheard Lauren chatting at a bridal shower. And while I couldn't corroborate it, it fit with all I known about her thus far. As all this was occurring, my parents slowly began to realize Lauren's true colors. During the few tense talks we had, their tone changed, though they didn't explicitly acknowledge it. They began to doubt some of Lauren's choices and admitted that her actions weren't totally justified. They did not, however, offer an apology or accept responsibility for their handling of the matter. I made the decision to put myself first, in order to deal with the family turmoil and learn how to establish more constructive boundaries going forward. I began therapy. I learned from my therapist that although I couldn't alter my family's behavior, I could limit them access to my life. After feeling like I was always on the defense for months, it felt empowering to regain that control. Unexpectedly, my extended family planned a party and made it plain that Lauren was not welcome. They wished to assist me and disassociate themselves from her harmful influence. I felt like I wasn't fighting this war alone for the first time. It was such a comfort to see those who were most important come together for me. I had established my priorities at the conclusion of it all. My primary emphasis shifted to safeguarding my financial future and emotional well-being. I stopped participating in any drama involving Lauren. Tyler refused to indulge my parents' guilt trips, and I turned to my close friends and extended relatives for support. I was able to breathe again for the first time in a long time. Update 5. Things took a drastic turn a few months after I formally severed my relationship with my parents. Tyler and Lauren. Mutual friends began to hear that Lauren had broken up with Tyler. Anyone who had been watching her conduct wasn't surprised by the news. She apparently began to distance herself from Tyler after recognizing that the inheritance dispute would not be resolved in her favor. Lauren moved out of their shared residence on the pretext that she needed space, and the split took place in private. Tyler was caught off guard. Tyler contacted me shortly after. The tone was different from the one I had become accustomed to throughout the inheritance play, which was aggressive and frantic. Rather, he expressed regret. He said that he had disregarded the warning flags because he wanted their relationship to succeed, and that Lauren had tricked him into siding with her. He appeared sincere in his regrets, but I made it plain that it would take time, work, and respect for my limits to mend any kind of relationship. In the meantime, my parents also started attempting to patch up our strained relationship. They began apologizing for their handling of the matter and admitting that they had allowed Tyler and Lauren to have their entitlement. I was receptive to courteous dialogue, but I maintained clear limits. I was clear that restoring confidence would take time. I decided to finally access my inheritance during this period and begin creating the life I had always dreamed of. Some of the money went into buying my first house, a comfortable flat in the city that seemed like a new beginning. I used the leftover funds to launch a small business that I had been envisioning for years. Although it was a calculated risk, the sense of autonomy and control it offered me made the effort worthwhile. My cousin, who had been my staunchest ally during the tragedy, become even more influential in my life. She guided me through the difficulties of launching my company and urged me to concentrate on the connections that were most important. From getting my first business customer to moving into my new house, we shared in each little accomplishment. Her steadfast assistance served as a reminder that blood is not the only factor that defines a family. Regarding Tyler, the consequences of his connection with Lauren made him face some harsh realities. He started going to therapy in order to deal with his codependency problems and gain a deeper understanding of why he had let Lauren control him for so long. He began to reconstruct his life gradually. Our connection gradually got better. He didn't ask for more than I was prepared to offer and respected my limits. Although it wasn't flawless, it was a positive move. Lauren, however, must deal with the fallout from her behavior. Her social media activity decreased following the defamation and cease and desist warnings. Her reputation had suffered greatly by the time her split with Tyler was made public. She finally erased her accounts completely, and mutual friends stopped interacting with her. Later, I learned that she had relocated to a different city in order to start again, leaving a path of bridges that have burnt. Another significant adjustment was made by my parents. They made the decision to retire and sell their failing bakery. They gave the excuses of stress and a need to make their lives easier, but it was obvious that they were also feeling guilty about the way they had handled the family dispute. They appeared to understand that my limits were strict, even if they occasionally tried to get back in touch. After a while, they formally apologized and admitted how deeply their behavior had wounded me. Even so, I was grateful for the gesture. I chose to put my personal peace first and stayed away. Support remained from the extended family that had come together for me in the height of the turmoil. Without the stress that had characterized previous parties, we started planning additional get-togethers. It gave me a sense of community that I hadn't experienced in a while. Some family members even directly contacted me to express their gratitude for my firm stance and for managing such a difficult circumstance with poise. Re-establishing contact with distant family members who appreciated my fortitude was one of the more surprising results. I was reminded by their words of support and encouragement that conflict need not be the defining characteristic of every family dynamic. After what had seemed like never-ending chaos, it was encouraging to see connections flourish. As my business grew, I became financially independent and felt like I had accomplished something. Every little accomplishment seemed like a win, and the difficulties of being an entrepreneur provided a pleasant diversion from the turmoil in the family. I didn't understand how much I needed the freedom to make my own decisions without being constrained by other people's expectations. When I consider all that has transpired, this event has shown me how much I've changed. I will always remember the lessons I learned about setting boundaries, putting my mental health first, and choosing self-respect above toxic relationships. Even yet, the path to recovery isn't always easy. I quote, "V finally reached a point where I can look to the future without being constrained by the past." Story 3. I am 28 years old, and like many soon-to-be brides, I was ecstatic when my fiancé proposed after 6 years of dating. We've been engaged for little over a year, and I've been meticulously organizing what I hope would be the ideal wedding. It would be an old-fashioned garden celebration, something timeless and lovely. Pastel hues, wildflower centerpieces, and personalized invites with beautiful floral patterns were all things I had in mind. It was private and personal, and it fulfilled every desire I had since I was a youngster. My 30-year-old cousin, Amanda, revealed that she had got engaged around 2 months after we set our wedding date. I was very delighted for her. Although we weren't very close, she was family because we had grown up together. When she suggested getting married 3 weeks before me, things were a little strange. At first, I didn't give it much thought. She is older, so I figured she wanted to have a kid and get married sooner. Yes, it was a little too near for comfort, but weddings are a common occurrence. Shortly thereafter, Amanda began exhibiting what I now recognize to be early warning signs. During family phone calls or text chats, she nonchalantly inquired about my vendors. At first, I didn't think it was strange. She expressed her admiration for my concepts and interest in how I came up with some of them. I assumed she'd just like my style and may draw inspiration from it for something new. I provided her with information on my florist, the caterer we had reserved, and even the URL of the tiny store where I had placed my invitation order. In retrospect, I was far too trusting. At my aunt's place during a family supper, the first true warning sign appeared. Amanda said that she was aiming for a similar aesthetic to my wedding as we were seated around the table. Wildflowers, soft pastels, and a laid-back yet sophisticated atmosphere. I could tell my fiancé was thinking the same thing when he looked at me. She seemed to be talking about my wedding. Nevertheless, I dismissed it. Perhaps it was only a coincidence. Pastel hues aren't very novel, and weddings nowadays usually follow trends. I then went to Amanda's residence a few weeks later. She asked me to come over and help her come up with ideas for her wedding. She had been really demanding, so I figured we could catch up. However, my stomach fell when she showed me her Pinterest board on her laptop. Her entire board was a perfect replica of my design, complete with vintage glassware, mismatched pastel bridesmaid gowns, and wildflower bouquets. Even the location she had suggested was the one I had originally desired, but was unable to reserve due to its already full capacity. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to maintain my composure. I asked her whether she found it strange that our weddings looked so much alike. She dismissed it with a giggle, saying it was completely accidental and exactly what was in style at the time. For the time being, I ignored it, but a few days later I brought it up in private once again. The fact that her wedding plans were almost exactly the same as mine bothered me, I informed her. What did she say? I was being theatrical, she remarked, rolling her eyes. She said I was attempting to control wedding design like I owned flowers and pastels. It hurt. I didn't press any harder, though. Now that she understood how I felt, I assumed she would back off, but I was mistaken. Rather, Amanda began to complain to our shared relatives about my exaggeration and how it was spoiling the joy of her wedding preparations. Her Aunt Linda called me and chastised me for being self-centered. She also told me that I should be flattered that Amanda found my views appealing. Feeling flattered? She seemed more intent on stealing my thunder. Fortunately, Amanda wasn't singled out by the entire family. I had the full support of my younger sister, who is also my maid of honor. In a group conversation with some of our relatives, she called out Amanda by pointing out how obvious her copying was. Naturally, this simply made matters worse. By attempting to reserve the same flowers via one of my vendors, the same florist I was using, Amanda exacerbated the situation. Only when the florist contacted me to make sure she wasn't making duplicate reservations for my wedding did I find out. After that, our family group chat really took off. Even though we hadn't spoken in person, Amanda quickly posted a lengthy letter accusing me of being irrational and making her wedding about me. Some family members spoke up in support of her, accusing me of being a bridezilla. Others agreed with me, stating that Amanda was obviously inappropriate. It was a complete disaster. There was more drama to come. Since her wedding was the first, mutual relatives likely chose it to save money because they started implying that they might only attend one of our weddings, as though that wasn't sufficient. Amanda claimed to have been inspired by my wedding preparations and began posting tidbits of them on social media. It seemed to be a total invasion of personal space. During all of this, my friends were my savior. They advised me to be resilient and concentrate on making today unique. Anything Amanda did. I made an effort, but at this time, I was thinking of inviting her. Because I knew it would just make things worse. I hadn't decided yet. However, the idea was undoubtedly present. I knew this was more than simply weddings by the time I understood how far Amanda was prepared to go. I wasn't sure how to deal with it without making things worse, because it seemed personal. I had no idea that this was only the beginning. Update. Amanda's big day occurred 3 weeks prior to my wedding. Within hours, pictures appeared all over my social media channels even though I wasn't invited. It was startling how much it resembled my plans. Her outside space was decorated with wildflower centerpieces and mismatched pastel tablecloths, giving the impression of a garden party. The bridesmaids even wore outfits that matched my color scheme of soft pink, lavender, and pastel blue. The hand-drawn flowers and old script font on the invitations are nearly identical to mine. In light of the fact that my wedding was quickly approaching, guests at her wedding noticed to a few of common acquaintances subsequently informed me that they were muttering about how similar the theme seemed. Some even inquired as to whether we had coordinated it. Naturally, Amanda claimed all the credit and dismissed the parallels as coincidental. It was difficult to avoid the photographs, even though I didn't want to look at them any longer. At Amanda's wedding, family members shared pictures of themselves with the words, "Such a beautiful day. Admire the blooms, pastel beauty in color." I had the impression that I was watching my wedding unfold without being present. I couldn't express how much it hurt. I made the decision to confront Amanda once more a few days later, but I wasn't going there alone this time. When I brought up the matter, both of our mothers were present. I described how I felt and how much her wedding resembled mine. Amanda broke down in tears right away, blaming me of ruining her happiness and making her wedding about me. My Aunt Linda, who is Amanda's mother, jumped in to support her, telling me that I should stop behaving like I owned a theme and that Amanda had every right to have her own wedding. Despite my mother's best efforts to defuse the situation, it was obvious that nobody was in agreement. Amanda blacklisted me on social media after that. Although it seemed juvenile, I must admit that I was glad to see no more wedding pictures appear on my stream. But the family was more split than before. Anne and a few relatives supported Amanda, arguing that I should be concentrating on my wedding and that I was being overly dramatic. Others were solidly on my corner, agreeing that Amanda's behavior was inappropriate, particularly my sister and a few close relatives. The vendor catastrophe followed. My caterer called to inform me that they had to cancel my reservation. I initially believed it was a scheduling error, but later discovered that Amanda had warned them to exercise caution and that I was challenging to deal with in a conversation she had had with them weeks prior. I was enraged. The wedding was no longer the only topic of conversation. She seemed to be actively working to undermine me. I made the decision to post a vague but direct message on Facebook. Although I didn't mention Amanda by name, it was obvious who I was referring to. I wrote about how it hurts when someone you trust takes credit for your hard work and scuttles your plans. Mutual and other friends expressed their support for the post, with some even implying that they knew exactly who I was referring to. Naturally, this merely fueled the flames. In an attempt to mediate, my mother recommended that Amanda and I move on for the benefit of the family. She had personally witnessed the impact Amanda's actions were having on me, so it felt like a betrayal. I informed her that I would not be contacting Amanda in the future and made the decision to cut off communication with some family members who were supporting her actions. Just 3 weeks remain. I came to the realization that my wedding plans needed some adjustments. I didn't want guests to arrive at my special day believing they had already witnessed everything at Amanda's. In order to make my wedding feel special once more, my sister stepped in and spent hours coming up with ideas. In addition to handwritten notes at each place setting, family photos, and a new color scheme for some of the smaller details, we also decided to add more personal touches. It felt like the only way to save the day, even though it wasn't ideal. A week before my wedding, Amanda texted me, so she must have sensed the tension. She expressed regret that I felt that way, but she insisted that I was exaggerating the situation. It was a flimsy apology. She ended the message by suggesting I let go of the drama so we could enjoy each other's weddings. I didn't respond. To make matters worse, my wedding planner started showing signs of stress. She mentioned how difficult it was to accommodate the last-minute changes and hinted that I might be overcomplicating things. I couldn't blame her. It wasn't her fault, but it added to the pressure. Meanwhile, mutual friends weighed in. Some were shocked by Amanda's actions and called her behavior a low blow. Others tried to stay neutral, but it was clear they didn't approve of how she had handled things. I started to realize just how far-reaching the drama had become. In the end, I made a decision. I was going to make my wedding about me. I stopped worrying about Amanda, her opinions, or what anyone else thought. I poured myself into making the day as personal and unique as possible, focusing on elements that Amanda couldn't replicate. It wasn't just about salvaging my wedding anymore. It was about reclaiming the joy I'd lost in the process. Update 2: my wedding day finally arrived. After all the chaos leading up to it, I was determined to focus on what really mattered, marrying the love of my life. The venue looked stunning, transformed by all the last-minute changes my sister and I had worked so hard on. The pastel color scheme remained, but we added personal touches everywhere. Framed photos of our families, a guest book table filled with handwritten notes, and even a handmade love story timeline displayed near the entrance. It felt uniquely ours. Guests began arriving, and I was busy soaking in the details when I noticed an unexpected face in the crowd. Amanda. She wasn't invited yet. There she was, standing near the entrance with Aunt Linda. She had a bright smile plastered on her face, acting as if nothing had happened. I didn't want a confrontation on my wedding day, so I let it slide. Aunt Linda was likely behind her showing up, claiming it was just family, supporting family. However, I was aware. The tension was palpable throughout the ceremony and cocktail hour. Amanda managed to insert herself into conversations, making it hard for anyone to ignore her. I overheard a couple of guests whispering about her in the drama. One even asked me explicitly if I had invited her. I shook it aside, but the uneasiness stayed. The reception started nicely. The remarks were passionate and amusing, until Amanda decided to steal the microphone. She wasn't on the program to speak, but she managed to make her way to the front at an unplanned moment. Standing in the center of the room, she offered a meandering toast about how imitation is the finest form of flattery, and how she and I had always had similar preferences. Guests exchanged bewildered glances as my sister, sitting next to me, murmured under her breath. I gritted my teeth, but kept quiet, determined not to let her ruin my moment. When it was my moment to speak, I chose to face the elephant in the room, and straight I made an emotional speech about authenticity, uniqueness, and how much care and love had gone into making the day unique to me and my husband. The room exploded in applause. Amanda seemed less than delighted, and I noticed her staring from across the table. Things intensified throughout supper. My mom and Aunt Linda got into a furious quarrel near the buffet table. I couldn't hear every word, but it was apparent that Linda was supporting Amanda while my mom was attempting to speak up for me. A few of relatives came in to calm them down, but by then the tension had extended to neighboring tables. What should have been a happy party turned into a family quarrel when cousins began picking sides. The reception was a great success in spite of everything. The guests were talking about the wedding's distinct feel and personal touches. With the sun setting in the backdrop, a friend of mine who is a photographer took a beautiful picture of the untamed flower arrangements. People were praising it as one of the nicest weddings they had ever been to by the end of the evening. Almost immediately, pictures from the event started making the rounds on social media. Pictures were shared by friends and family with comments like, "What a lovely and special celebration and love, how personal every detail was." Amanda must have been moved by the tremendous positive response. She began posting strange notes on her Instagram stories the next morning. One remarked, "It's funny how people change when they're the center of attention," while another read that certain individuals would stop at nothing to get attention. Once more, the family group chat blew up. Now family members who had not attended the wedding were arguing on which Amanda had done a better job of handling the issue. While some criticized me for being selfish for not inviting Amanda, others emphasized that she had caused trouble by showing there without permission. I completely skipped the group photo. It took too much energy to keep up. I decided not to get in touch with Amanda after the wedding. It felt like the healthiest option, but it wasn't simple. In addition, I began avoiding Aunt Linda and several other family members who had encouraged Amanda's behaviors. I realized that I had to keep my peace, even if it meant severing relationships. Within the next weeks. Numerous friends, cousins, and even some distant relatives sent me encouraging comments. Others related how they had always found Amanda challenging to work with. Others commend me for my poise in the face of adversity. Knowing I wasn't the only one who recognized her conduct for what it was gave me a sense of validation. The fact that Amanda's fiancé contacted me personally was one of the most surprising events. He expressed regret for her behavior and alluded to the serious problems their relationship had become as a result of the tension and drama. He didn't elaborate, but it seemed to me that their engagement was in jeopardy, and the consequences didn't end there. My family grew even more divided, with some members severing all connections. Although it was disheartening to witness, I was also relieved that I had established boundaries in an effort to put the turmoil behind us and move on. My husband and I began organizing our honeymoon. In retrospect, I saw that I had gained valuable insight. Losing individuals who don't respect your limits can sometimes result from sticking up for yourself. And that's all right. At last, I was prepared to put the chapter behind me and go on. Update 3. I made the decision to stop communicating with Amanda after the wedding. I informed my mother that I would not be going to any gatherings where Amanda was present, and I blocked her on all platforms. While some family members praised me for sticking to my principles, others criticized me for being immature for taking such a firm stance. My sister was very outspoken in supporting my choice, reminding everyone that Amanda had arrived without permission and only created chaos. Aunt Linda texted me a lengthy message shortly after. She began by accusing me of being overly sensitive and harboring resentment in her typical passive-aggressive manner. However, it soon turned into a full-fledged guilt trip. As though I were the one who had shattered the family in the first place, she insisted that I apologize to Amanda in order to save it. I didn't respond. I had no intention of contributing to her story. Amanda responded as was to be expected. She started circulating tales that I was envious of her wonderful wedding and had only made mine special to rival hers. I received screenshots from several cousins of group discussions in which Amanda was yelling at me. While some family members shut her down, claiming she was being absurd, others believed her. The family split only became wider. The tipping point came when someone shared a video of Amanda's spontaneous speech at my wedding. Among friends and distant relatives, the video began to circulate. People called her speech embarrassing and questioned why she felt the need to take center stage on someone else's special day. In the harsh remarks, Amanda "se actions went beyond simple familial strife. It was turning into a public humiliation. Amanda's fiancé called me out of the blue a few days after the TikTok became viral. He said he didn't know how far Amanda had gone until after the wedding and apologized for everything. He acknowledged that she had been purposefully trying to outsmart me for months by following my ideas. He seemed truly remorseful, but based on his hints, I could tell he was also annoyed. Their relationship had been severely strained by the event. My sister, meanwhile, decided to stand up for me whenever she could. She didn't hesitate to criticize family members who supported Amanda, and her direct approach caused some of them to reconsider their position. Amanda quickly began blaming these relatives of betraying her and referring to them as phony family. She felt increasingly alone the more she reacted. The first significant occasion following the wedding was Thanksgiving. As promised, I didn't go. Aunt Linda's house was significantly emptier than normal because some of my cousins also chose to boycott. According to what I later learned, Aunt Linda angrily complained about how I was spoiling the holidays and accused me of destroying the family at the tense meal. The night ended early, apparently because no one wanted to hear it. All this was going on. Amanda's engagement became the subject of widespread rumors. I was informed that her fiancé was completely rethinking the wedding. One relative claimed that he was tired of the turmoil that resulted from her fascination with me. I tried not to become involved, but I wasn't shocked. I had more important things to think about, and it wasn't my business. During this period, I was surprisingly contacted by several distant cousins. I received support over the phone from a few aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years, who said they had never approved of Amanda's demeanor. I was even informed by one that Amanda had once attempted a similar prank on a cousin's birthday celebration years prior. Knowing that I wasn't the only one who saw her real colors was a comfort. Positively, I at last began to concentrate on my new life with my spouse. We started organizing our honeymoon, which we had postponed in order to accumulate funds for a particular occasion. I was able to divert my attention from the instability in my family by looking at potential trip places and imagining what may happen in the future. I felt validated, even if the family conflict wasn't entirely settled. I took pride in the fact that I had defended myself when it would have been simpler to give in. Although the rifts in the family dynamic were regrettable, I had no obligation to mend them. I was able to breathe for the first time in months. A few weeks following Thanksgiving, an update, the news leaked. The engagement between Amanda and her fiancé was canceled. One of my relatives claimed that he was unable to cope with her incessant craving for drama and her obsession with me and my wedding. He told some of our common acquaintances, but he had to reconsider their relationship as a whole because of Amanda's fixation with surpassing me. There was a lot of conjecture in the family group chat, and soon everyone knew the engagement was gone. Aunt Linda immediately laid the guilt completely on my shoulders, as was to be expected. She says that because of the tension I produced, Amanda's relationship ended and that I had turned the family against her. If anybody would listen, she would send lengthy messages, portraying myself as the villain and Amanda as the victim. She was mostly ignored, although it was difficult to escape the drama. But Amanda wasn't keeping quiet. In a lengthy, tearful post to the group chat, she accused everyone of destroying her life. She said the family had betrayed her by failing to support her throughout her engagement, and she accused me of planning a smear campaign. A number of individuals collectively abandoned the channel because the message was so outrageous. It was obvious that no one was interested in putting up with her antics any longer. Other relatives began to share their own memories about Amanda in the days that followed. According to one, Amanda purposefully arranged their marriage shower and her baby shower on the same day a few years prior, making family members choose sides. Another described how, while she was in high school, Amanda had circulated false information about her. It became more evident that this was not an isolated incident as more people voiced their opinions. Amanda has a lengthy history of inciting conflict and controlling people. Amanda's situation worsened when her TikTok that made fun of my wedding reappeared. It was discovered by someone at her place of employment and reported to HR. It seems that publishing anything that may reflect negatively on the firm was strictly prohibited at her position. She ultimately received a formal warning, and there were suspicions that she was being closely watched for any future misbehavior. Amanda tried to issue a public apology in the midst of all this turmoil. She apologized for any confusion in a lengthy Facebook statement, but she also reaffirmed her assertion that she had done nothing wrong. When she tagged me in the post, friends and relatives noticed right away. I decided not to answer. I chose to remain totally silent instead, which ultimately gained me a great deal of respect. People could tell I wasn't playing along with her theatrics, which further diminished the sincerity of her apologies. Amanda's reputation suffered greatly. Outside of the family, friends began to distance themselves from her. I'm fed up with her incessant demand for approval and her propensity to include people in her mess. Even many who had first backed her started to question her actions. Her allies were dwindling rapidly. Aunt Linda made an unsuccessful attempt to mobilize people in favor of Amanda. Her behavior was no longer acceptable to anybody. Aunt Linda's attempts to guilt-trip everyone into forgetting Amanda failed, and the family began to go on without her. With Amanda no longer berating me personally, it was obvious that most of the family had had enough of supporting her conduct. At long last, I was relieved. Even without Amanda or Aunt Linda, my mom planned a little family meal. For the first time in months, there was no sense of tension or awkwardness at the occasion. We loved one another's company, laughed, and caught up. It seemed as though a healing process had begun, even though everything wasn't entirely back to normal. Amanda, meanwhile, kept up her self-deprecating, cryptic online posts. On her Instagram stories, messages like, "People love to watch you fall," and "It's always the kind ones who get hurt," appeared. However, nobody appeared to care at this point. She no longer had the attention she so sorely needed. Personally, my marriage was doing well. I got a ton of kind responses from friends and family after sharing pictures from our honeymoon and our amazing vacation to Italy. Concentrating on something constructive felt fantastic. Naturally, my sister couldn't help but make one last jab after months of enduring criticism. She used inside jokes and subliminal clues that only people who understood the scenario would get in her TikTok post about the entire affair. People laughed at her inventive shade and speculated about the backstory in the comments section, which went viral. Amanda didn't publicly react, but she must have seen it. Her words were few and far between now. As I reflected about everything, I was overcome with appreciation for everyone who had supported me. My spouse, my sister, and my friends had supported me over this entire ordeal. Even though I wouldn't want this type of turmoil to happen to anybody, I learned a lot about establishing boundaries and advocating for myself. At last, I was prepared to put this chapter behind me and concentrate on the future. Update 5. Family gatherings gradually resumed when the dust calmed. I told my mother and few close family members that I would only go to events that did not include Amanda and Linda. To my relief, it seemed like a necessary limit. It was respected by most of the family. The anxiety that had pervaded every occasion for the last year had vanished without them. People were laughing together for the first time in months, and conversations felt more relaxed. Aunt Linda began to throw less of her own parties as she realized she was losing control of the family. She seldom received invitations to her house, and when she did, most of her family graciously rejected. Her lengthy group chats and guilt trip eventually came to an end. The change seemed odd, yet nice. The family dynamic started to improve as her influence diminished. Amanda, on the other hand, vanished from social media. She stopped posting on Instagram and stopped posting on Facebook. Later, a cousin revealed that Amanda had completely erased her TikTok account. She seems to have finally been caught up in the criticism, both online and inside the family. She must have found it more difficult to deal with the complete cessation of conversation about her than the criticism itself. I made the decision to start throwing my own parties as the family conflict faded into the background. My spouse and I invited the cousins and other family members who had helped us through the stress of the wedding to a laid-back brunch at our house. It was well received. We had a variety of enjoyable board games, delicious food, and stimulating discussion. Making new rituals that did not include Amanda or Aunt Linda was very revitalizing. Our broken family ties were being reestablished gradually but steadily. A handwritten note showed up in the mail one day. It came from Amanda, who expressed her regret for everything and said she had thought about what she had done and understood how hurtful it had been. I wasn't sure if the letter was sincere or simply another attempt to save her name, even if it seemed sincere. I chose not to answer. It took more than just words for me to think she had changed after everything that had transpired. My wedding, on the other hand, became somewhat of a family legend. It was mentioned at almost every meeting. How lovely everything was, how well considered the details were, and how much fun everyone had. Outshining Amanda was no longer the goal. It was about how, following months of conflict, my wedding had reunited the family. I was pleased of what we had accomplished outside of family life, and it came to represent tenacity. I began focusing my energies on my work. I put a lot of effort into my work, and it paid off. My supervisor acknowledged my leadership throughout a difficult project and gave me a promotion. It was satisfying to concentrate on something constructive and observe observable outcomes. Amanda made an effort to patch things up with her other relatives. While some of them carefully re-established contact with her, the most stayed at a distance. A few casual texts wouldn't repair the harm she had done to her relationships. Many family members weren't prepared to give her another opportunity just yet, and her attempts to reintegrate into family life appeared flimsy. Aunt Linda's announcement that she was relocating out of state was a significant change. Feeling alone and being rejected by the family, she made the decision to move in order to be near an old acquaintance. For other family members who had good recollections of her before to the crisis, it was a moment of mixed emotions. For most, however, her departure was like the last puzzle piece coming together. The family had more space to recuperate, and there was less stress now that Aunt Linda was gone. My sister got engaged in the midst of all of this. The family was ecstatic, and I was ecstatic to witness her happiness. When she requested me to assist her in organizing the wedding, I made it my goal to make sure there would be no turmoil on her special day. We spoke about color palettes, selected locations, and generated ideas for hours. I was determined to keep it safe since it seemed like a new beginning. Another delight was getting back in touch with cousins who had previously remained neutral, now that Amanda was not agitating them. It was easier to have conversations. We discovered that we were smiling about our early years, remembering the good old days, and mending the relationships that had been damaged throughout the wedding drama. Amanda, on the other hand, appeared to adapt to a more sedate lifestyle. She completely stopped going to family gatherings and instead concentrated on her own group of pals. Whether on purpose or not, the distance she established seemed to be advantageous to everyone who was not around her. The chemistry inside the family kept getting better. In retrospect, the entire experience taught me a lot about the value of boundaries, and advocating for myself, although difficult, it was essential. My connections with those who genuinely cared about me grew stronger as they realized why I made the decisions I did. The entire family started to get better. Despite our imperfections, we were able to connect and support one another in new ways without the continual turmoil. I felt calm for the first time in a long time. I had finally closed the chapter of my life that was dominated by Aunt Linda and Amanda, and I was ready to concentrate on the future with my family, my husband, and the happiness we had so diligently rebuilt.